Hello, everyone, and welcome to MCA 630 Digital Communications Leadership. Today's lecture is going to be about digital leadership and constructive feedback. Let me share my screen with you and start the slideshow. Let's talk a little bit about digital technologies and what they mean to effective leadership and how can they assist us in providing constructive feedback. Digital technologies are important in a workplace environment because not just did they allow us to quickly access information, they also paved the way to easier collaborative work and efficient communication among employees. Adopting digital technologies is crucial for success in the business world and for effective leadership. How can they pave the way to easier collaborative work, and how can they pave the way to success? Through digital technologies, we can easily connect with people across the globe. We can easily communicate with potential stakeholders, with our business partners, and with the people who work inside our company at the same location. But sometimes we decide to, instead of resorting to in-person communication, we feel that certain things are more and better communicated in via digital means of communication. How do we relate digital leadership to these digital tools that we can use to improve communication? When it comes to digital leadership, one of its crucial elements, one of the crucial points of digital leadership is openness to change. And when we talk about new technologies, we talk about continuous change and innovation. We've seen in the past few years, well, not just in the past few years, but basically in the past almost 3 decades, with the introduction of internet, those people who were able to easily adopt new technologies were more likely to succeed in their business. And then a few years later, we had actually it was more in the first decade of the 21st century, let's say, when they already adopted the internet and the internet tools that they started to use to communicate and with their coworkers, with their families and friends, and when they started using these tools also to be more efficient at work. Right after that, we had the introduction of social media, and people started switching to these platforms to share their opinions, to collect information, and so on. And now, in the past 2 years, one of the things that has been dominant is the use of artificial intelligence in communication. So, when we talk about digital leadership, if you want to be successful in it, you need to be open to embrace these changes that are happening and innovation. Success with respect to digital leadership equals being ready to take risks, to experiment with new ideas and drive information. So even when we talk about artificial intelligence and ChatGPT in particular, there are a lot of ethical issues and concerns that arise with respect to using these technologies on one hand, but then on the other hand, and to be successful in what you do and to be successful in guiding your followers and guiding your employees, you need to learn what are the best ways to utilize these technologies, how we can make good use of them in an ethical way. So that is basically what digital leadership entails. Digital leadership entails information technology, starting from the introduction, operation of software, so software application operating systems and hardware. So it basically entails both using hardware and software at work. When it comes to hardware, we're referring to cell phones, modems, computer, touch screens, and so on, but also work ethics to legal issues in information technologies. Now, looking into digital digital communications leadership, one of the aspects that we are particularly interested in from the leadership perspective is how do we, in such an environment, how do we impact employee performance enhancement? What do we need to do to make sure that our employees are giving us best results? What does it mean that we need? What should we do in order to make sure that they're successful at work, that they're satisfied at work? One of the things that every effective leader will focus on is providing resources for skill development, just like as digital leaders need to take into consideration innovation, risk-taking, look into what's currently happening in the domain of new technologies, they also need to make sure that they're supplying their employees with necessary training that will allow them to develop skills and so they can be successful at work. Another thing to increase employee performance is setting goals and outlining expectations. So be clear in what your expectations are and make sure to explain them in a clear, concise, effective manner. Introduce rewards. Rewards are a good way to motivate people to work. And of course, make sure to monitor their performance and provide constructive feedback. In this lecture, we are especially going to focus on providing constructive feedback and what it means in a work environment. How do we provide feedback that we know is respectful, effective, and that will have an impact on an employee to do their work in the way we want them to do and in the way that we believe will also help them achieve their goals. So providing constructive feedback is critical in guiding a person toward achieving a goal. What does it mean to give constructive feedback and why is this so relevant? It basically gives the person an insight into their work. So this is what we believe, or I believe is you do, is it that you're doing well? And this is where some improvements are needed. So it's basically evaluating their work, providing an insight into what works well, and also directions towards the best possible outcome. Constructive feedback also motivates an individual to complete a task, work on a project, or improve their overall performance. Enhancing employee performance is beneficial both for the employee and the company they work for. It also, so it's if an employee has accepted that feedback, if they accepted the feedback and worked on their project accordingly, then it's going to benefit both them and the company they work for. But aside from that, aside from the benefits that both the employee and the company will have from this type of feedback, giving constructive feedback also contributes to creating an overall positive climate at work. There are things to consider. We don't just deliver feedback at any time. There are several things to consider when it comes to delivering feedback. The first thing is timeliness. Deliver feedback in a timely manner to allow potential issues to be addressed sooner rather than later. So it is important that we react to things on time before it is too late. One of the things I do, and you probably, if you are one of the students who has worked on their master's thesis with me, you know that I like when during the semester, students usually send me portions of their thesis, and I would go over it, give them feedback, they would make corrections, then that the part of the thesis that they corrected, they will send it back to me and I will look at it again with their updates So the reason I do this is because I don't want to wait for students to finish their entire paper and then say, oh, your introduction is not clear, your literature review misses some important, relevant scholarly research related to this topic, and so on. I really want to make sure that from the beginning of the process, they understand exactly what they're working on, and I want to make sure that I give them feedback, like for every, let's say they write 2 or 3 or 5 pages, and then they will send it to me and I will go over it and give them my feedback. So I'm going to make sure that from the beginning they know exactly where they stand. And that's why I feel timeliness in this case is important, but it's generally important in providing any feedback, because you can only imagine what happens if somebody is working on a 3-month long project and then no one goes over that project until before the deadline. Well, if something was not set up right at the beginning of the project, then you may just encounter so many problems because you didn't react on time. So timeliness, like, go monitor what's happening, see if at the beginning of implementing or creating a project, you can provide your employee, a person, a team member, and invaluable feedback. Just make sure to do it in a timely manner. So that is one thing. Another thing is, consider the place, like where are you going to deliver that feedback? Think of a place where feedback should be delivered. Should it be in an office? Should I deliver my feedback at the meeting or in a virtual space? So these are some things to consider. I always feel if it's something very formal, I would always suggest delivering feedback in the office. But if we're discussing, let's say, a team project, then the best place could be to just deliver that feedback at the team meeting, or in some cases, if certain clarifications are needed, and you don't need to necessarily meet that person face to face, but you feel that it would be better to deliver feedback orally, rather than using a text message or communicating via email. So for that reason, I would say schedule a video call, like do it in a virtual space, talk to that person, clarify what is needed via Zoom or FaceTime or any other video app. It is also important to consider the mode of communication. So aside from the place, so I kind of already, when I talked about virtual space, I kind of already touched upon the mode as well. So virtual space can be anything. It can be um like having that communication with the person over an email or a or a video call, a conference call, and so on. But that's like the next step, like just thinking about the mode of communication, depending on whether you want to whether you want to say it over the phone or in an email or schedule a video meeting. But the first thing, like, think about the place. Should it be in your office, at the meeting, in a virtual space? And then consider, once you figure out which place that's going to be, consider the mode of communication. Now, let's take a look at the feedback content. What is important to know? So let's say, once you figure out how to deliver this feedback, at what time, what place, and which mode you're going to use to deliver it, the next thing to do is focus on the feedback content. What is it that you feel that feedback should include? So focus on the topic at hand. So focus on a specific topic when you're delivering feedback. Of course, when communicating with another person, it's always good at the beginning to have a very like a really, really small talk, relaxing conversation, and then you can proceed to giving that person feedback. And one of the things to consider is really to stick to that topic, like focus on the topic at hand. So that topic can be, for example, manager's feedback on customer relations, or it could be peer feedback on an assignment. In your when you explain what should be improved or what areas are good, just make sure to be specific and direct, because based on your specific uh, based on your specific reactions, based on your specific instructions, that person will react and potentially improve their project. Praise the person for what he or she did well. It is always important to have positive comments and to praise people's work, to say what is good. Of course, if nothing is good, then there's nothing to praise. But also, aside from praising what is good, suggest what kind of improvements are needed. I tend to, sometimes I tell students when I read papers and when I have like a lot of papers to read, this especially refers to graduate papers when I'm going over research projects. So I always write in an email what is good about it, like, oh, you did good so far. I have some corrections and so on. And sometimes in the paper, if I have too many students, which I think I should also improve that. But sometimes when I have two students, I would just say, I'm going to be very formal with my corrections. So please don't take this the wrong way. I might be a little dry, and the reason for this is because I really have a lot of people's papers to read. So I just need to make sure that you understand what is it that I need you to change in the paper. So I would kind of, even if I am in a way like dry with like correct this, correct that, I will like emphasize that in an email to my students, because I want to make sure that they understand that I deal with a lot of content, and I want to make sure that I'm giving them proper instructions. So it's always like important to like share that story in case you don't have too much time to praise every paragraph that they wrote, let's say. Let's put it that way. Another thing, so suggest what kind of improvements are needed. That is always important, and provide examples. It is good, like if you feel, let's say, you know what, like this study could be interesting to look into, and it might help your paper, for example. So we'll provide examples of good practice in marketing or public relations, and that could help a person understand better what is expected of them. Let's take a look at the effectiveness of feedback. The source providing feedback needs to be credible. So that is a number one thing, is that we need to make sure that feedback comes from a credible source, the source that the person to whom this feedback is being delivered can trust. The problem should be defined clearly, and one thing that should be avoided by all means is being judgmental. Feedback needs to be based on facts. So if I'm saying, let's say to you, there is a problem with this reference, I couldn't find it online. So it's a fact that the reference simply didn't match the content, and I had a problem with that. So I needed clarification on that. So it's not me judging whether um, you did something wrong or not, but I'm referring to the fact that the content doesn't match the reference listed, and I want your clarification on that. So that's an example when you are giving feedback, pointing at something and basing that on fact. And usually when it comes to papers, I like to also add like a link or a citation that proves my point in that feedback. So show how your criticism should benefit the recipients. Explain to them, if you make these corrections. So let's say if I'm working on your paper and making these corrections and explaining how you should double check this reference because it doesn't match the content in your paper, and then why would that, how would this change benefit you? Well, simply you will show me that you're a credible writer, and if your study follows the rules if it's well structured, if everything is referenced well, you could consider submitting that study for a conference presentation or for publication, for example. So that's the way of explaining how my criticism and the reasons why I'm asking you to fix this will benefit you. Now let's take a look at the feedback delivery. It is always not always, but it is definitely desirable in many cases to deliver feedback to another person directly in a private conversation. When is it this especially important? We live in a digital era, and also we're talking about digital communications leadership. So we're trying here to figure out ways to and navigate this complex workplace environment where we increasingly use digital communications, and when people either work remotely or they come to work twice or three times a week. So to deliver feedback to another person directly doesn't necessarily happen frequently, but it is really important, especially this applies to situations when a superior is providing feedback to a subordinate who has not been successful in meeting the company's expectations and obligations. So when there is a problem, when there is a big problem, especially, that problem is best communicated in an in-person conversation. If more people are involved in a project and the feedback refers to all of them, it is good to deliver that feedback in a group meeting. We talked about some of the places of communication. One of them was the meeting. So this actually is a good example when you want to make sure that that feedback is being delivered to the group in a meeting. So if there is a problem with a particular group member, let's say a project that who is also working on a project, then it would be best to deliver that feedback directly to the person if other group members um, are not problematic. Let's take a look at some delivery tips, how to make sure that you're delivering good feedback, what you need to keep in mind. The first thing is to be respectful and polite. So communicating things aggressively really never helps. So try to deliver that feedback, keeping in mind that you're respecting the person you're communicating with, and that you're being polite to them. Avoid negative words. Don't be judgmental. Avoid excessive criticism, because it can just scare the person away. It doesn't necessarily help them really focus and make improvements on their project. Share a story about another person's success after accepting similar suggestions. Um, so I remember one of the things when I had students who were struggling, I would mention that I had students who, even students who failed in some of my classes or had a C, but then I explained to them thoroughly what my expectations were. They, let's say, they missed to submit projects on time, but they, in some other classes, they accepted my advice. They accepted that criticism. They understood what they failed to do, which is why they were not successful in class. So they changed the game completely, and they ended up having an A in another course that I taught that they took with me. So uh, like telling a student or telling an employee like a success story of another person who was basically in their shoes is one of the things that could help in feedback delivery and encourage that person to work harder, work better. Listen to a subordinate attentively, see what they have to say, and if there are any external elements that they're dealing with that kind of prevents them to to invest more effort or to do that project paper in a way they would under different circumstances. Allow them to share their opinion. So tell them what they think, and also provide guidance on how they can improve their performance. Looking into the digital delivery, we definitely keep in mind that sensitive information, difficult conversations are always best in person, even though it's hard to start a conversation in person. It's still the best way to deliver feedback it would be in a face-to-face conversation. There are circumstances when feedback is allowed to be delivered virtually. So, for instance, if your subordinates are working remotely, you can schedule a conversation with them via Zoom, FaceTime, or any other video application. WhatsApp, for instance, phone conversations also work well, especially with quick feedback on a running project. I am actually a fan of phone conversations, so I think they are very effective, and I like if there is some clarification needed, I like to talk to people over the phone. When using an email to provide feedback, start with a polite message and then list several points pertaining to a project, for instance, that you expect to be addressed. State that you're open to any questions, concerns. One of the things that I like to do is sending my feedback in an email to a student if we're talking about like a paper or a project. I always like to meet over Zoom because we're working remotely, but I also like to kind of list major points, like major things that the student should focus on, because I think when as they're working on their project, they can go back, look at my email and see exactly what is it that they need to do. Or for instance, I'm just working on editing my book about digital news literacy at this moment, as I'm especially like this week that I'm recording all these lectures. So I'm working on this book about digital news literacy, and I received feedback from a blind reviewer, and then I'm looking at their comments, and I'm just like, as I'm working on the edits, like I keep going back and reading their feedback, and it really helps me a lot because I can go through those notes and know exactly what are the things that I need to improve. So if there's clear statements, do this, clarify this concept, add this information, make sure to cite this author, and so on. It's really helpful to have it outlined that way. Now, my first exercise for you, I have two for this lecture, but my first exercise is as we're talking about digital leadership and as we're talking about especially new technologies, this year, artificial intelligence and ChatGPT especially are taking over, and I want you to look into that and specifically use this tool to see whether it can help you get feedback from it. So what I want you to do is submit your leadership reflection paper to ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT for constructive feedback on the paper's content and arguments. Copy and paste the feedback into classes under ChatGPT feedback. Now, below the text, write an analysis of approximately 300 words reflecting on the insights provided by ChatGPT. So please don't ask ChatGPT to write an analysis for you, but you do it yourself and explain in what ways ChatGPT was helpful and what changes you would make to its feedback. Was there any additional feedback you needed from ChatGPT? So please do this without like fully using ChatGPT. Just make sure that you're using ChatGPT to give you feedback on your paper. Then go over that feedback. See to what extent it is really helpful to you and what you feel could be improved, like in terms of, ChatGPT generated feedback. So what is it that you see as its flaws, and what is it that you see as, oh, this AI really helped me work on my paper, and so on. Now, I have a couple of more slides, and what I want to focus on now is workplace feedback, because in my previous lecture, I talked a lot about multi-generational workplace, and we talked about how different generations usually expect different leadership styles, and they also communicate using different tools. But also this reflects on the feedback delivered to them. Millennials, for example, accept to receive timely and constructive feedback from their superiors that will guide them to positive outcomes. So they're focused on their goals, they want to be successful, and they accept timely and frequent feedback. They want to make, and also they expect that the person delivering feedback is respectful and polite to them, which is one of the key tips that I provided for you for this lecture. When it comes to Generation Z, they are pretty much similar to millennials, but I would say, based on the research that I did and based on some other research I read, that they expect even more feedback even more often than other millennials, and they prefer getting important feedback in person. But when it comes to specific tasks, they like getting that feedback via digital communication. So if they're working on a project, let's say, and you feel like you need to tell them what are specific things that they need to look into or further develop, it is best to just list those tasks and send them, for example, an email in which you're explaining what specifically they need to do. Now, negative feedback. So we talked a lot about being polite, being constructive, making sure that you're respecting that person. But what happens, if we feel like the person is really not doing a good job and that we need to let them know about it? There's nothing positive to tell them. So how do we handle this? And how does negative feedback affect people? First of all, it frequently discourages employees from performing a task at hand. So if you tell somebody that their work is completely sloppy, that's not going to encourage them to improve it. It affects the climate in a company. It can contribute to a negative climate, but then it also might be necessary sometimes. So how do we deliver it if we feel that we need to deliver it? Negative feedback. You still need to be respectful and thoughtful about the words you're choosing. Again, being judgmental, being excessively showing that excessive criticism is not going to help. Let's take a look at one example on what do we do if we, for instance, need to deliver feedback to a sluggish employee. How do we handle this situation? Like, one of the things to do is invite them to a meeting and let them know what you will be talking about. So you need to let them know in advance so they can reduce some anxiety before they come to meet you. Prepare for a conversation. They need to be aware that you know the project details. So if you're discussing with them a specific project, then just make sure that you know exactly what are the points of the projects what are the elements of the projects that were just bad. So you know exactly what those people need to improve. Have a list of things and then explain that in detail. Begin a conversation with, I invited you here as I would like to hear about your project. What stage is it in? So let them express their opinion, their viewpoint. It is important in any situation. So just to make sure that that person feels engaged. So they're not just brought up to be criticized, but they also feel as part of the team, as part of the project, and they feel engaged. Let them speak. Explain the importance of the project and offer help. For example, our client has high expectations of us. We need to deliver a high quality marketing strategy for them. If you're facing any challenges with the project, you need to tell me about it so I can help. And ensure that they will deliver. So tell them, let's meet again on Thursday to see how things are going. So just make sure that you will follow up with them, that you will invite them again to meetings. So just to make sure that they will do the necessary work. Let's take a look at leadership with respect to feedback seeking. In which cases are people likely to seek feedback from their from leaders? In which cases they're not? People don't just passively accept feedback, they also actively seek it. Now, they seek feedback by asking for it directly. So they would come to their manager and ask for feedback, or they will simply be monitoring, observing their environment. They look at their work in comparison to others. They see how people react to their work. So that type of monitoring is also part of getting an indirect feedback. And it helps them learn how well they're meeting goals and how others perceive and evaluate their work and their behavior. Feedback seeking is also related to job satisfaction and performance. And in this regard, I want to especially discuss two types of leadership in relation to feedback, because as I mentioned, depending on the type of leader you are, how open you are to your employees, how willing you are to listen to them, how flexible you are as a leader, that are all important things and variables that will encourage or discourage, if you don't have them, if you don't have these characteristics, they'll either encourage or discourage people to seek feedback from you. So let's take a look at transformational and transactional leadership and feedback and how does it work. In case of transformational leadership, and this transformational leadership is somebody who has digital leadership characteristics. It is a leadership style that guides people in a visionary way, motivating them to embrace change. Exposure to transformational leaders is related to greater intentions to seek feedback than is exposure to transactional leaders. So people who have transactions, who have transformational leaders at their companies, universities, and so on, they are more willing, more encouraged to seek feedback from them than those who are exposed to transactional leaders. Transactional leaderships is embodied in a structured exchange of information between superiors and subordinates. So it doesn't mean that you're not going to seek feedback from these leaders, but there's a more, I would say, formal relationship between followers and transactional leaders, because transactional leadership focuses on order, structure, rules, and regulations. Perceptions of behavioral characteristics of leaderships are significantly related to intentions to seek feedback. So how we perceive leaders, how we perceive their flexibility, openness, and so on is going to determine how we seek feedback. Transformational leaders are perceived as those people who have expertise and who are very approachable and available. Transactional leaders, on the other hand, do not get personally involved with their employees, except in cases where performance expectations are not being met. In that case, they will have a conversation with them and explain what expectations have not been met. For these reasons, they're likely to be perceived as less approachable than transformational leaders, which makes employees feel less comfortable asking them questions or asking them for feedback. Now, to conclude this lecture, seeking feedback is very important because it can, and you either as a leader, you need to make sure that employees are willing to ask you questions, to ask for your feedback, and as a follower, you should be somebody who actively seeks feedback in order to improve your performance. So seeking feedback can help an individual become a more valuable and credible asset to his or her organization. Delivering feedback both in person, deliver feedback both in person and digitally, depending on a situation. Again, some things, especially if you have specific instructions, they're good to be delivered via email. But if there is a problem that you feel you can solve only in an in-person conversation, then ask that employee, a colleague for a conversation, or if that cannot be achieved in person, but you still feel that you need to talk face to face, then an alternative to that would be organizing a Zoom or FaceTime meeting. Keep in mind generational differences when delivering feedback. So some people need to be approached, especially Generation Z, with more sensitivity when you're talking to them. Constructive feedback motivates employees and contributes to a positive climate at work, and so does negative. And on the other hand, like negative feedback can have a negative impact on the work climate. And I have one more exercise for you. I want you to write feedback to one of your peers' motivational speech assignment, posted in the thread where the peer posted their video. Write about 300 words, post feedback to the peer who has not received feedback from anyone else. So if you see that one of your peers has already received feedback from somebody else, then just look for another peer who has posted a video and post your feedback underneath their video. These are my references. Thank you very much. And please, if you have any questions or concerns, feel free to send me an email or schedule a meeting with me. Thank you very much for listening and have a great week. Bye-bye.